everybody, and welcome to the music rating, ranking, and reviewing podcast that we like to call Music Meltdown, in which we rate, rank, and review any artist's discography, songs, really musical topic, or just whatever I feel like discussing. This episode, we're going back to the 80s, the very start of it, with the post-punk movement. However, not exactly the band that you would initially think of. No, it's not Joy Division, it's not a cool band. Talking about the Psychedelic Furs. Yeah, these guys were one of them. That's about it. Oh yeah, they're pretty cool. 8 records to their name, or is it 7? Something like that.
8.
Okay, 8. They had their little stint in the 80s and entirely fell off the world in the 90s, then randomly showed up again in 2020 for some reason. But yeah, with that being said, I think this is a pretty cool group. A bit of an interesting group because you don't really hear a ton about them. Like they come up in somewhat of conversations, but for the most part, I'd say just like Pretty in Pink and a couple of key songs. But they really weren't on my radar at all until Case Like Music covered them last year for Cramtober. And I gave a couple of their records a spin then. Didn't get too into them around then though. But listened to all 8 of them once or twice now, and I feel fairly confident about them. Zach, your thoughts on the Psychedelic Furs?
Yes. So first got exposed to them by a cover of one of their songs by the Foo Fighters.
Oh.
Well, regardless of what you think of the Foo Fighters, I think they do some pretty good covers, or at least if you don't like the covers, they do a good selection of songs that they cover. Yeah, they've covered like Killing Joke, and Baker Street, the song, Gary Rafferty, and then Gary Newman, a bunch of stuff. So Psychedelic Furs got into that bunch, and I was like, okay. And I loved that song. I'll get to it later. I almost don't want to say which song that is yet, but yeah, I think they, for some reason, I mean, they're just associated with like underground 80s and alternative 80s, and it's kind of a music fans band sort of, but this was a very interesting discography because I kind of heard a bunch from all the different albums, and I realized that I was drawn to them in a very unique and interesting way. So we'll learn more about that.
That's one way of putting it.
But yeah.
We'll see how this goes. They're I feel like for the most part, they have a couple of records that are pretty decently regarded, but none of these are like considered stone cold classics or anything. So I think for the most part, any order is somewhat, maybe a little bit acceptable.
I will challenge that.
No, you won't challenge it. You'll squash it. But anyways, let's get right into this. You want to kick it off?
Yes.
I assume that we're talking about the same record at the bottom.
Yeah, this is where we're going to align, and then after this, it's going to be complete chaos. But my guess is we're going to align here. I have Midnight to Midnight as number 8, Midnight to Midnight. So yes, this album, it's very disappointing. It feels so sanitized. I don't know exactly what I was expecting because I've heard that before, and I thought maybe it was going to sound like hair metal or something, and it's not that. It still is very polished and professional, and you can tell that it fits in very well with other music like it of the times, and everything sounds pretty good. It's just there's not much spark or inspiration behind most of the songs. They tend to blend together. The opener, Heartbreak Beat, is very catchy, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. Shock, I don't really like at all. It's like the least shocking song ever for a song called Shock. And I listened to this album a couple of times. It's really hard for me to like distinguish some of these songs. The lyrics are very basic. I mean, I just don't know exactly what to say. If you just only care about it's kind of sounding like everything else and sounding good, then you'll probably like this. But for me, I'm just looking for, I turn to this band because I think they have a unique artistic perspective on things, and I just don't really get that from here. So this is just at a 2.5 for me, which means that it's fine, but I just don't really have any reason to listen to it.
Okay. Ooh, my friend, this is going to be an interesting episode because at the bottom, yeah, we agree. Um, I actually wrote it down as Medicine to Midnight, so I guess that Foo Fighters comparison really is apt here. But anyways, this is a pretty big letdown for me after being pretty positive about everything that came before it. But this record just really drags. I'm kind of surprised that you didn't like this one. I thought you might have it higher. In a lot of ways, it's kind of their hysteria. But anyways, just curious. Alrighty, but they've been going in a poppier direction since forever now, and this is, for lack of a better term, their arena rock record. For the most part, though, it's just boring. The playing isn't very memorable. I was mentioning this to you before we started, but for whatever reason, I thought his name was Bernard, and I have it written in my notes Bernard. But I mean, Richard Butler, it kind of
I have no
sounds
idea where you got that from.
probably New Order, but
Yeah, okay.
Richard Butler, he kind of just sounds the same across all these songs, which they have a complaint throughout the catalog. Probably one of the reasons why they aren't as well regarded is Butler has a pretty limited vocal range, and a lot of his vocal performances kind of sound the same. It kind of just boils down to how much passion he's putting into them, where he's at his best and when he's at his worst. But there isn't just much engaging about this record overall. Unlike you, I thought that there were some solid cuts at the beginning, notably Heartbreak Beat, and I liked Shock. I thought that was one of the highlights. But everything else is just not very good. 2.5 stars. It's fine, but it's pretty close to two. I think if I went back to it, I could see it dropping because it's no bueno for the most part. So midnight to midnight, emphasis on mid. So there you go.
Well, I don't see the comparison to Hysteria by Def Leppard, other than just they're both two posh 80s albums, but
they're both boring 87 that's overly produced.
No, it's much more interesting to listen to Hysteria, in my opinion. All right, we're moving on. Number 7, and this is I think going to be a lot higher for you, but it's Mirror Moves, the album right before Midnight to Midnight. And this is a very weird one for me because I do love a couple of tracks on this album a lot. They're among my favorites in the whole catalog. So the opener, The Ghost in You, I think is really beautiful, really touching, has that kind of like 80s romantic John Hughes kind of sound. And yeah, it's almost like syrupy with how much melody it has. And I think that's part of the problem is like I already get so much from that song, and then the rest of the album kind of continues a little bit in that vein, but just not quite as strong. And it's just kind of overwhelming at a certain point to me. A track like Heaven is also good, but it's just not quite as strong as The Ghost in You. And then the second track, Here Comes Cowboys, it just feels very mechanized, and I'm just not super drawn to it. My favorite part about the Psychedelic Furs, I think, is their sound and the way that they kind of experiment with noise and those facets. So I'm drawn towards that side of them, and this is a very clean album, and a lot of the songs are kind of a similar pace, and so it just kind of gets lost for me a little bit. My Time is okay. Like a Stranger, very similar to Here Comes Cowboys, but not even as good as that. So the big highlight on the second half is Alice's House. That one's a fun track for sure. But yeah, Highwire Days, I think people like that track, but it just doesn't do much to me. So yeah, it's a clean album. It's different than Midnight to Midnight for sure, but to me, I want a little bit more pop in their sound, a little more rock, and a little bit more of that noisy alternative side. And this just feels a little too polished for me. But I've upped this to 3.5. I still think it's good, but I just prefer other stuff.
Interesting. You're already in good territory. I have a couple of records before we get to there. And set a timer for, let's say, 30 minutes or so. I'll be talking about that way later. But You're about to do the same, my
As
friend.
expected.
But anyways, I find it interesting that you say pop because I'd argue aside from Midnight to Midnight, that's probably their most pop record. I mean, Billy Idol's producer worked on it, just super 80s sort of popped out.
Yeah, well, it's
Not
very,
to the Rundgren level, but
you said rock or pop?
you said earlier that you were wanting a bit more pop.
Oh, rock is what I was trying to say.
Yep. Okay. I figured as such because it doesn't really correlate.
No, yeah, pop would be Mere Moves
Yep.
for sure. Yeah.
Anyways, let's get into this. Number 7 for me, World Outside. Yeah, I have some difficulty placing these next three. They all kind of feel around the same, so it's just kind of a matter of where they end up. And this is where World Outside went. Despite it being 91, I feel like they really struggled to adapt to the 90s here. They have a bit of beefier guitar, but they still have those crazy 80s synths that kind of were subdued a bit more on the previous record because they were trying to make Disintegration by The Cure. But this is kind of going back a bit to the more 80s Midnight to Midnight, but obviously doing it better because it's hard to do worse than that. It almost reminds me of a more poppy side of The Cure, like A Hell on the Door. And although it hadn't been released yet, I definitely get notes of Wish, which, spoiler alert, my favorite Cure record. I feel like the main issue with this record is Butler's voice. I don't think he really blends well on this record. Shut up, I'm right. Anyways, I do think that past that, the record's a bit of a mixed bag. All their records have good songs aside from Medicine to Midnight or Midnight to Midnight. I need to fix that in my notes. But yeah, I think that notably near the beginning, this one starts out pretty strong. Valentine's really good, In My Head, and Until She Comes opens the record really well. I really don't like Don't Be a Girl. I think that the phrasing of that track is just terrible. We don't really get back on the right track from me until Get a Room. Overall, though, it's just decent across the board. I think you may have been a bit wowed by that opening three piece because I feel like this album just struggles to find its own identity a lot of the time. And I think it makes sense that they kind of stepped away, sort of stopped existing there for 20 years after this record came out. I do still have it at 3 stars. I think it's a decent record, and I'm going to think that way about my next two records. So, World Outside.
Yeah, I gotta avoid putting stuff in Rate Your Music before these.
I saw you had it in for Made of Rain, and it's like curiosity got the best of me. Curiosity is
Yes.
still getting the best of me, to put it
Well,
lightly.
I will be talking about that later. But certainly your placement is very consistent with most people's placements. So it wasn't like I was expecting you to have a different opinion on that. Where are we on? 6? All right, number 6, Forever Now, the one right before Mirror Moves. Now, people, this is one of the two albums I think that is usually considered their best album. And, you know, it's produced by Todd Rundgren, who's a great producer and, you know, a great artist as well. So I was expecting a lot from this one, and maybe that was the problem. Maybe I just over expected, or I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if it just doesn't quite get to where I thought it might get. And even then, like, there's really only one song that I think is very good on this album, and that's Love My Way. I think it's one of Richard Butler's best vocal performances, and I think it's you know, it's a little bit maybe overdone lyrically, just a tad, but it's still, it was a nice sentiment at the time. And I think you know, the marimba on it, it's a little bright, but it works, and it's definitely one of their more essential tracks. So definitely like that one. Overall, you know, Todd's sound here is definitely a lot cleaner than the first two albums. So I definitely feel like everything's more balanced, and normally these would be good things, but the issue is, like, I feel like he would be setting this up really well if they were just amazing songwriters. And I'm just not sure this band, the songwriting is like their super high point, outside of maybe like a few tracks. But yeah, because of that, a lot of the songs that I want to sound more interesting just feel a little bit subdued. Goodbye is maybe one of those where it has a little bit of that Curie type feel, but it just doesn't quite get into that cool of territory for me. And then you've got President Gas. It's a nice guitar part, but the lyrics are a little bit. I think that's one of the better songs, but it's still just kind of a like cool political song, and trying to be cool. I don't know if it's really making a very specific point or doing something that's that thrilling. A lot of these songs kind of I've listened to them a few times, but Run and Run, Danger, Merry Go Round, all those songs just are not that memorable to me for whatever reason. I feel like on my favorite Psychedelic Furs material, what I really remember the most is the sounds, the noisiness, the just kind of chaos. And because everything is so tight and balanced here, it kind of takes away what draws me to the band a little bit. They got rid of the saxophone player on their first two albums, and I liked the saxophone elements in the sound. So I still think this is good. It's definitely listenable, but it just doesn't elevate itself above other material for me. So I'm at 3.5 for this.
Well, you tried, but no dice. Anyways, I kind of do agree with you. To piggyback off what you were saying, they aren't great songwriters. I'd say that they have good composition and whatnot, but the actual lyrics and like meat of the material, it's just it gets them by, but they don't have like a Killing Joke, or they don't have like a Just Like Honey or something to point out other groups from this time. But I know you aren't that big on Jesus and Mary Chain, so this is what it is.
No, I like them for sure.
It's definitely not to my level. But
anyways, probably not.
Anyways, maybe a bit contentious. I know that you like this record a fair bit more than me, but it is what it is. Next up, I'm talking about the debut, Psychedelic Furs. I do get why you would like this, only because this record kind of sounds like trash. It's weird because Steve Lillywhite produced it and whatnot, but I just don't like the sound of this record very much. The same can kind of be said for World Outside. I don't think that record sounds that great. I don't think that there's like anything too overtly remarkable, but if you like this album, you're gonna like the Furs. I mean, just to put it lightly. This is probably the most straight up post punk that they ever were, but they do play it with enough energy to where almost at points it kind of feels more baseline punk. Butler's voice is really strong across this. He's really energized. I kind of like whenever he's trying less. He's just sort of having fun with his vocal performances and is really just going strictly based off emotion and energy. I feel like that's when he's at his peak. A lot of the songs here just end up bleeding together a bit, and they end up lacking a strong impact. However, the highlights here are still very good, which is going to be the case with all of these albums coming up. I think Sister Europe is great. Same with Imitation of Christ. I think it closes very strongly with Flowers. Overall, though, it's debut that has a ton of promise to it. Although I do think it kind of ends up feeling a bit one note overall. It's another 3 stars for me, but pretty soon we're going to get to some good records here. So, the Psychedelic Furs.
Nice. Yeah, I agree with you on the sound of that one, and I think it's one I want to like more. And actually, I just have it one spot above you. Number 5, the Psychedelic Furs, the debut. Yep. So I will keep talking about it. This was the first album I heard by them, because the song I was talking about earlier that the Foo Fighters covered is Sister Europe, and I love that song a whole lot. It is just dark and brooding, and the saxophone in it is so cool. And I love how it's very melodic for Butler. He's not usually quite and you hear a lot of that on this album, that he just kind of sings the same note, va 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 va. But in that track, Sister Europe, it's a really beautiful melody. One of their best, if not their best song. The other big highlight of this album is the opening track, India, specifically the opening to that track. Just the way it comes in with all the kind of guitars layering on themselves. The first time I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like one of the greatest openings of all time. I just felt like it just completely sucks you into the song, and it's also impressive for an album like this. And generally, I find this way, feel this way about both the first two albums. Just how much it kind of predicted some of those 90s sounds, in that kind of the shoegazy feel a little bit. And I think where this album falters is that there's just there are punkier tracks that I like Pulse. I think it has a lot of energy, but just sometimes it just gets a little too much into Richard Butler's just kind of shouting, and there's just not a lot of musical ideas going on, so it's like too much noise. You need a little bit more song on some of these. The most offensive track here is Black's Radio, which is just like 7 minutes of that, and it is just really awful to listen to. So much so that so that's only on the UK edition of the album. The US edition has a really great track added called Susan Strange, which I like, and then Soapbox Commercial is the other track on there, which is fine. It's shorter at least. So as a result, I actually think the US album is 4 stars for me. But UK, because of Blacks and Radio, it adds on to already we've got Fall and We Love You and Flowers, and just all those just kind of fail to really push into that well-crafted song territory. So some really great highs here. Wedding Song has a really creepy atmosphere, which I like as well. But I'm gonna stay at 3.5 for this one.
I like Flowers a lot, but generally speaking, I get what you're saying. It seems like we have very similar points of view on the band, just different records that we feel highlighted, I suppose.
Well, it's because I haven't talked about some of the ones you talked about yet. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, we talked about the weaker records, but anyways, you kind of threw me for a loop there because your habit is 4 stars in rating music. So I figured that
I changed things a little bit just to mess with you,
No, that's all good. It is what it is. Moving up from here, I have a feeling you're gonna like this record more than me. I have Book of Days. I think that this is interesting. Not that good, but interesting. After the far poppier and, for lack of a better term, worse record, that was Midnight to Midnight, this is them steering a bit more into their post-punk direction. I think it's a bit dirtier than the previous ones in that style, though, almost a bit grungy at points. I find it interesting because the guy who produced Disintegration did this one, and I didn't actually get that much Cure on here. Like, obviously at points, but I mean, it wasn't as overwhelming as I've heard people describe it. Shine and Entertain Me are both really great starts to the record, but I think there's a pretty big lull after that. The title track to Parade just really didn't interest me, which is a shame because that's about half the record. The back half is still pretty strong, though, my favorite of which being Mother's Son. This record's pretty close to 3.5, but I do think that it's a tad more inconsistent than I would like. So it's another 3, but it's a higher 3, and moving forward are all records that I genuinely like. So I like a fair bit of this catalog, just had to get through some less than stellar records. So yeah.
Well, the ones you consider less than stellar perhaps are getting I think if people have been following along, the last 3 albums are all still left for me to talk about. So just one at the beginning run.
Yeah.
I feel like
it's a shame, we know.
When you hear about this band, you don't hear much about the last albums. But I'm going to start talking about those now. The first one I'm going to talk about is Made of Rain. That's the very last one from 2020. And this one grew on me a lot on the second listen. I think like the previous 2 albums, even though they were, way long before that, I just think that in their later period, it just sounds so good. Whatever they're doing, and it's with different producers on all 3 of these albums, but just, maybe it's just, they weren't recording with great technology, at least the first 2. They just probably didn't have the funding or whatever to until they worked with Todd Rundgren or whatever. But I feel like on these last albums, they're both getting really, really good sound, as well as a sound that really fits their style. and emphasizes the qualities that make them a very cool group. And so here, they come back without the guitarist. I think John Ashton, is that his name? But with a whole new set of people, including some other people in the kind of like underground 80s world. And as a result, you got a big sound with like saxophone and everything once again. I feel like there's just a ton of tracks in the first half of this album, especially, that really grab your ear. You'll Be Mine is a really fun kind of skip to it with the like fiddle or whatever it is on there. And so that one's just really enjoyable to listen to. Wrong Train has a lot of cool sounds on it, and I really like that one. This Will Never Be Like Love is kind of forlorn. And then Ash Wednesday is kind of like a haunting tale and has a very kind of cool rainy atmosphere to it. So there's just a really good stretch of songs there. Even Come All You Faithful is a little bit more of an attempt to make a like hit song in the like vein of the more 2010s, 2020 kind of feel. And I like it. I think it helps vary up the album. And No One is a cool song, kind of with a more gothic feel. So this album's really hurt by two things. The first thing is that I do notice in Richard Butler's voice that it's not quite as good as it once was. And that was always, for me, one of the huge draws of the band. So it's a little disappointing. I think especially the first track, The Boy That Invented Rock and Roll, which is a good song. I can hear that, a little bit of that strain, and it's very subtle. He still sounds good. It's just that I can tell a little bit that it's a reunion album, and I don't want to be able to tell that it's a reunion album. That said, the songwriting and the sound don't sound like a reunion album. They sound as inventive as ever. But then the other big problem is that there's just a couple of tracks at the end. It's 50 minutes long, and it should be 40. And Hide the Medicine should not be on this album. Probably get rid of Tiny Hands as well, or one of the either probably Stars maybe. I like Turn Your Back on Me well enough. Regardless, some of those last songs I'd enjoy trimming if it was up to me. Sounds like they're your favorites for some reason. We'll love to hear about that. But as for me, I've upped this to 4 stars. I think it's really, really great. I'm impressed that they just keep growing and building. That's sort of how I hear this band.
Nice. You definitely seem to be higher on them than I expected, which is good. Definitely higher on them than me, as it appears, considering I'm just now getting into good territory. I believe you're in very good right now, so it is what it is. Yeah, I didn't agree with much of that review at all, except it being really good, so we'll get to that later, because it's easily the best thing that they've done since the 80s. But anyways, next up for me, maybe a bit low, but I suspect you have my back on this one, going to be Talk, Talk, Talk. For me, just a pretty big step up in all forms across this record. The band is slightly more pop focused, but still very clearly a post-punk act. It's less dependent on atmosphere and style as opposed to strong hooks and melodies, most notably in the opener Pretty in Pink, probably the song that most people know the group for. The playing is a lot tighter here as well. Everybody just seems like they've gelled better as an overall unit, and it makes the listening experience more interesting overall. And to mention one instrument, which it's a shame that they cut it, but the saxophone across this record is to die for. It's not really that noteworthy on the debut, I would say, but here is really when it's just absolutely sensational and really makes you appreciate when it comes back on Maiden Rain. But anyways, most notably on the closing song, All This and Nothing. Despite all my positives, there are definitely some duds here, Dumb Waiters being the main one. I think this is still a good record. I have it at 3.5 stars, clearly inching towards the right track, but maybe they needed a certain producer to kind of help them push forward. Maybe a guy who helped out this band back here. But yeah, Talk, 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 3.5 stars. Good record.
Yes, I'm not surprised that you have that one over Talk, 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 but yes, I have yet to talk about that one. Talk about it.
Just want to interject real quick. You've talked about my entire top 3. right now. So
Yeah, I feel like maybe the same.
yeah,
So yeah, this is an extremely different lists here.
I feel like we
Oh.
really agree on this group.
Midnight to Midnight is the worst one. That's the only thing we can agree on here.
It's the only thing that we need to agree on. So
We'll see, but yeah, I'm defending my take on this band. Continuing on, number 3, Book of Days. This is a big rebound for me after Midnight to Midnight. I just was. I mean, the best part about this album, I can sort of see that the songwriting is maybe, that's kind of the case with this band. I would say kind of throughout, except for one album, but. I think that, again, the real draw here is the sound, and opens with Shine, and it's just exactly the little drops of items at the beginning, and then kind of coming in with the guitars and the just the whole thing. It does have, it's the producer of The Cure, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about The Cure by necessity in an upcoming album, but just safe to say, I think that The Cure I think they have a great sound. I think Disintegration is a great sounding album, and you can definitely hear that here too, except I feel like there's almost even more of that like big heavy guitars that make it almost a little bit more into like 90s territory, or shoegazy territory. It's not quite there. I'm not saying that this is a shoegaze album, but it just has more of that, like, well, Jesus and Mary Chain maybe feel to it. So Entertain Me, and this is like a little bit more of a driving track, and I just love when Richard Butler does this kind of attitude, just the way he's entertain me, like it really works for me. I think he just has such a way of singing, and he's a really unique vocalist, definitely not a typical vocalist. Definitely a little bit of like a nasally sound, but just he still has a lot of like snarl, and you're kind of like afraid of him, and I just think that's so cool that he's able to do that with this like less typically macho voice or whatever, but still getting those same qualities across. Book of Days is a really cool one. Should God Forget, big burst of energy there. Torch kind of draws it back, so it's just a good flow. I will definitely, say that the last 2 tracks are kind of where it loses me. I feel like those finally kind of turn into songs that it just don't have a lot of song to back them up. But thankfully, before that, we get one of the best songs in the Psychedelic Furs catalog, which is House. Just a really, really catchy song, a really well-written song lyrically. Shame Will Shake This House. It gives me a little bit of the National vibes. I just, not this, again, the song itself, but just the way the lyrics kind of present themselves. Yeah, I really dig that song. Yeah, you're gonna leave now, but I still have the floor here. So yeah, you're crazy. All right. So since Adrian has left the meeting, perhaps I should go on to my number. Oh, you're back.
So what did I miss?
Nothing.
All right, you dare compare this band to my baby right here, my beauty?
Just this one song, I think lyrically it gets
Okay,
there.
fair enough.
Moving
Anyways,
on.
yeah, man, we just can't agree. I I loved Mother's Son. I thought Wedding was really good. House is good, but I mean, I don't think it's like the greatest. I really like the later songs on that record. And I found the middle
It's very
stretch to be the
interesting.
dull part.
You liked Wedding and I Don't Mind?
Wedding was good. I didn't like I Don't Mind, but I think I was just happy to be done with the record at that point. So I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah,
I thought that
exactly.
one was solid. Anyways,
It is solid. It's 4 stars. Very solid.
no,
Yes.
let's do some subtraction. 4 minus 1 equals 3. Yeah, I don't know.
Just
No, you're cool. You can
enjoy your fluffy Psychedelic Furs.
I will. And I will sooner than you think. Because my number 3 is Forever Now. Yeah, I don't really get why this is thought of as being their best. I think it's kind of just a step forward, but like it way more than you do. The Furs brought in Todd Rundgren on this record, and everything just sounds 10 times better. I think even you could admit that, despite liking the end result a little bit less.
What is better?
Forever Now.
It's cleaner.
Which is better. The instruments are a lot clearer, the individual parts pop a bit more. And there's a heavy addition of 1982 synths that tend to play both for and against this record. To be fair, I like it a lot, and I have it at a high 4 stars. This and my next one are both pretty high 4s. But at this point, I feel like some of the 80s elements kind of overdo it. Maybe just because Richard's voice doesn't play as well into the poppier sound, which is going to make a record really interesting for me to talk about. I still do like it, however. I just didn't like the horn sound on this record at all. I feel like there's also less focus on horns. Like there are still like additional horns, they just don't have the player anymore, which is sad. And when they kind of show up, they just sound lousy, especially on the song Danger, which is weird because it's fucking Todd Rundgren and this man can do no wrong. Well, until you get into his actual album.
There was Meatloaf.
I agree. Despite that, there's still plenty of killer songs on this. The title track's excellent. Love My Way equally so. And my favorite song here was the closer, No Easy Street. It's a really strong record, but there are some notable holes. Still at 4 stars, though. Still easily better than anything that they made in the 90s. But that being said, it's a pretty good album. Now let's hear you talk about fucking World Outside.
You're not going to hear me talk about that one yet, because I still have one of the earlier ones to get to, although they are close. Number 2 for me, Talk, Talk, Talk. And I thought this was going to be my number 1 for sure. It's definitely a great embodiment of their sound. It's very similar to the debut, and it still has the noisiness and the underground feel. But it's just, this track list is just much more solid. There's not a single song on here I like as much as Sister Europe, but that doesn't mean that this isn't. It's clearly a much better record. Opening with Dumb Waiters, and I like this song. I'm not always in the mood for it. I can kind of see where you're coming from, but I like that, he's definitely doing his kind of like shouty vocals here, but I feel like they really work well in a more aggressive type song like this one. With the very like blaring saxophone kind of in the background. But I think what this album does well is it balances kind of these more abrasive songs with the more melodic songs, and then Pretty in Pink comes, and that one's more of a melodic tune and has kind of a nice message to it. Then you get right back into it with I Want to Sleep With You, which is amazing song, just so much kind of like dark swagger to it, and the lyrical perspective is just so like bracingly honest that it almost sounds shocking, and just very cool a work there by the Furs. No Tears goes back right into the more melodic side, and it has again that kind of beautiful John Hughesy type feel to it, which of course, Pretty in Pink song. I don't know quite the history there, but it was eventually in the movie or something like that. Forget exactly what was written before or after, but Mr. Jones might like the single version better, just sonically, but just, either way, they're both pretty good. Into Like a Train, now we're getting into just points where, again, it kind of has that, it's so noisy for the early 80s, but it feels a little bit like it could eventually turn into like Ride or something. I don't know exactly what 90s I'm thinking of. Even like, obviously a very different band, but Oasis will have some of those like big blaring guitars and stuff like that. So It Goes On really reminds me of that. So Run Down is the one song on the album that's never done much for me. All of This and Nothing, really cool how it has kind of like instrumental interludes to begin and end it, but then the middle song is more dark and has a really nice chorus to it, and then ending with the the perfect little bow tie of She Is Mine. really the only thing that keeps this from my number one is that the production is still a little bit unclean, but probably in terms of innovation, this is definitely their peak album, and it's a really good album. So 4.5. Talk, talk, talk.
I mean, sure, it's less clean, but it also has better songs. But anyways, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Best version of Mr. Jones is on August and Everything After. What? But anyways, um, number two. Uh, Initially expected to be my number one, which I'm sure would have raised some eyebrows. Talking about Made in Rain or Made of Rain. Very close between this and Forever Now, but they do slightly push Made of Rain above. I just really like the more atmospheric approach of this. At some points, I know this is definitely a stretch, almost feels like a light, very light tinge of like almost ambient with how it just lets the instrumentals take over and just have the soundscapes just sort of flourish. It's a cool callback to the earlier stuff while not sounding like dog shit. Contrary to what you said, I actually love Butler's aged voice. I think it's really similar, but I think it has like this rougher, more like more gravelly sense to it, a bit more character. Was Tom Waitsy in that regard? No, that's way too much a stretch. But anyways, overall, I just think this is their best set of songs since '84. The Boy That Invented Rock and Roll is a really great opener. Rod Train is great. Same with Ash Wednesday. My favorite track was probably No One, but Tiny Hands and Stars are both very strong as well. This album doesn't really have any of that big 80s flair, nor does it have somebody like a Todd Rundgren. I just think that's a really strong record across the board. It could be a 4.5. I think it runs slightly long, and I didn't really care for Come All Ye Faithful. Like, I think it's interesting for the first minute or two, but it just kind of drags. Yeah, one of these records where I just feel like trim a track or two, even though I really like some of them. You could probably cut something in that first half. But yeah, just really strong. 4 stars. Very good, Made of Rain. Probably the best one of these like weird random reunion records that I've heard so far. Trying to think of like any other one that's actually good. So
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the
I'll
best.
get back to you on that because yeah, most of those suck. So
Well, not in the case of this band. As you know, though, I like all this late period stuff. And
strange.
I'm glad you at least like one. Now I'm going to have to make a very difficult a case here because World Outside. I mean, I don't know if anybody else in the world that hears it like I do. Yeah, I'm not seeing it on other people's list, and yet it's just for me. I was shocked by this one. I just thought, wow, like I had no idea they had this in them. I've listened to this like 5 or 6 times already. It is like total Zach core. Wow. Yeah. So, okay. How do I even start with this album? So first of all, it still has, so the producer is Stephen Street, who produced some albums by Blur. But interestingly here, it does feel more Cure-like, maybe even more so than the actual producer of stuff by the Cure from Book of Days. Yeah, and I feel like they really, compared to Book of Days and compared to a lot of their stuff, they really up the melody here. Probably the only comparison would be their poppy period, like Mere Moves and stuff like that. But here I get that balance that I'm looking for from them of really interesting sonic textures and cool songs that kind of mix with more melodic material. Starting with Valentine, which is just a really, really great way to open. I'm totally sucked into the world of this album. And it transitions perfectly into In My Head, which just has a super catchy hook to it. Yes, it's very Cure-like, but I think a big reason why I like this album is because I've always had a little bit of a thing with Robert Smith and The Cure in the way that he just sings things so much. Like, I know how he would sing a track like Don't Be a Girl. He would just make it like, don't be a girl. And like, it would just completely, sound so huge. But I like how with Richard Butler, it keeps it on that like plane where it's more snarling and more sinister almost. And I think that's a really interesting mix to kind of hear this Cure-like music with Richard Butler as a singer. So Until She Comes is, it could be about maybe drugs or something like that. It could just be, a song about kind of a toxic relationship or something along those lines. But I actually think this was a hit at the time, kind of forgotten by history, but I think it's really beautiful. And I was very curious what you thought about Don't Be a Girl. I thought it was totally a possibility that you would hate that song. So I foresaw that was an option. You got to know that I totally dig this song. I think it's a very, very, just the attitude of it is very unique. Just the way that he kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's toxic.
Almost Matt Healy like.
I don't know about that. I'll have to think about that one. But yeah, just the whole framing of it is kind of like he knows that he's bad for this person, but like at some level, like he knows what he's going to do anyway. And yeah, it's a very interesting kind of song. And I think the guitar kind of playing off of the vocals and everything is really cool. Sometimes is another great one. It feels like we're getting a little bit into like REM Automatic for the People type territory here, where it's like prove it sometimes, and it like drops and just leaves you in this like dark yet kind of reflective state. And yeah, just a very memorable song to me. Tearing Down is a really again cool and atmospheric one. It's not quite as memorable, but whenever I hear it, I just love it. Then you got There's a World, and I think the chorus on this, why wait, there's a world outside. It also kind of just has that lyrical perspective that I really like from them, and I think they turn it into a really cool song. And we're already 7 tracks in, and I'm just pretty much loving all of this. Get a Room, it almost it kind of goes back to that like REM-y folky sound, or maybe even more so on this one. Last 2 tracks probably not quite as good, but better than the last 2 tracks in Book of Days for sure. And All About You apparently was like cut down from a super long jam or something like that, so you can hear that it's very fresh. Yeah, so I just think that this is some great songs, great sound, a really interesting thing to have found. I did not expect anything that sounds like this, but I think it's very true to who the Furs are. I think it has that kind of like alternative feel. I know that there is the Cure overlap a little bit, but I still think that they're doing their own thing, and I think that this sound is a great vehicle to express it. It's not perfect. I'm not going to say this is one of the best, albums ever or anything, but 4.5 for World Outside, and my favorite Psychedelic Furs album.
Oh, okie dokie. Anyways,
I stand on this hill alone.
I push you off.
I feel like you'll not be the only one. I look forward to seeing if people want to try to bury me over this.
Do I really care that much about the Psychedelic Furs, though? That's the issue.
Well, I do, because of World Outside. That was like, I thought Talk 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 would be the tip top, and I'd just be like, okay, they were, they had some good ideas, but it never quite congealed. And I heard this, and I just was like, okay,
I wish we were talking about that one right now. But anyways, out of curiosity, how do you think that would play for you in '91?
It would play well. I can't quite think off the top of my head.
Because 91's there. Bad.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what's difficult.
Temple of the Dog, Nevermind. You got October.
I mean, in 1972, I had 4.5s that didn't even make the top 25. So it very much depends on the year. But just thinking now, like probably not top 5, but possibly top 10. Definitely like top 20.
It might make my top 20. I don't know. I have to look at what all I have rated for 91. Anyways, kind of interesting that that my number 7 was your number 1. Kind of mirrors My number one is your number seven, Mirror Moves. That was fucking good. Go me. But anyways,
I'm
this is a bit of
impressed.
a shouldn't be. That was fucking weak. But anyways, this is a bit of a culmination to where the first were leading to, in my opinion. Clearly, this is their most pop leaning, even without Mr. Rundgren, the keyboard here. But I feel like this is just a more dynamic record overall. The band feels like, as a whole, they're starting to fully embrace the pop side of things and take a bigger push to that on this record, which I feel like they were doing on Forever Now, but I feel like they still had like some of that alternative post-punk roots that was stuck in the writing. This record, they're just busting out these pop gems back to back. I think that Richard's voice sounds weirdly more natural on this record compared to Forever Now, which is weird considering how I said that I don't think he fit well into the pop side of things. He sounds awesome across this record. The Ghost in You, it's a really great opener because I want to upset people. I could say that the MCR song with the same title is better, but I'm not going to. Here Comes Cowboys is awesome. And Heaven is also really good. My favorite song would be the closer here, Highway Days, which I think is just sensational. I don't have a ton to add here. I just think that it's their most well-rounded record, greatly blending their pop punk sound with their heavy pop leanings and great knack for melody and hooks. And it puts itself into a lovely little record, going 4.5 stars. I think it's a great album. But anyways, yeah, that was the
We were
Psychedelic
on
Furs.
different planets. This is one of the most
This is a mirror image.
different lists. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that was fun though. This is reminds me of when I had Spoon with Rich. I don't know if you caught that one yet. That was
I watched a little bit of it. Yeah.
there was some dramatic differences on that list, but this one even more so.
Yeah,
Can
I
make
guess I probably like this band a tiny bit more than you when
no, I'd say you definitely like them more than me,
okay.
considering the fact that I really only had what four
I mean,
records.
I feel like I
considered
do
good.
rate things more highly, more easily than you, probably a little bit,
You do,
but
you do. But
even considering that, I just think
then
I
again, you
would
have 7 out of 8 records at least at good,
yes.
and you have 5 at 4 or higher if you consider the U.S. debut. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think,
it's pretty cool.
I really only knew the first 5. I mean, I hadn't fully listened to some of them, but I knew a bunch of the tracks. So I kind of just assumed, oh, they're going to have 2 at the beginning that I'm pretty into. And, the debut I'm a little disappointed by. So, like, how far can this band really go? And then just the ending stuff, I just think it sounds so good and are just some of the best late period albums of really any band, in my opinion. So, and I know that you feel differently there, but I get that there's another market maybe for this group in the more pop leaning material that they did, and I definitely at least like the singles from that period. So I don't mean to hate on Forever Now and Mirror Moves. They're just less my thing overall.
Yeah. Just want to point out this is a record from 2008 by Elvis Costello that I think is really good. Just putting that there. Anyways,
You're just doing that to torture me there.
Yep. Anyways, yeah, differences of opinions, but we both I like them a fair bit. They're not like my favorite band or anything. I'm doing a post-punk video sometime in the future, or by the time that this goes up, it'll be way in the past probably. But none of these records are going to make that. I don't think. And overall, I think that they're a good band. I think that there's really good songs across all of the records. However, I do think that, as we've mentioned before, their biggest crux is they just aren't the best of songwriters. Like, they can write a good melody, they can write a good hook, but they can never, or not that they can never, it's just they rarely fully create like a perfect song, like a great song to their name.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Richard's voice, it's good. I like it. It definitely grew on me over time, but
It's very unique and kind of iconic. That's, I think, the best part about it.
iconic. That's maybe a stretch far, but I get what you mean.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, that was the Psychedelic Furs. I don't really have anything else to add about these guys. You?
No, even with my unique opinions and stuff, I have to admit that there's only so much you can really say about this band. They're good, but definitely
I will say
for
one
some
more.
other groups in the same style.
Even still, there are some bands that I like way more And a certain band I can think of off the top of my head whose later work is way worse, but we can just let that float on by and not
But
mention it.
whose earlier work is possibly
Oh,
better than the
fucking
whole
light
catalog.
years better.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Not even close. Porcupine smashes the shit out of all of these records. Oh my god. But anyways,
I
that
was
didn't
listening
happen.
to it a little bit after I listened to World Outside last night. So
Porcupine's a 5. I'll lay that out there. So I think that record is sensational. Ocean Rain's kind of overrated, but anyways,
they're both great.
sure. But yeah, that was the Psychedelic Furs. They're an interesting group, kind of reasonably less talked about because I'd rather listen to any other post-punk band 90% of the time. But hey, these guys are anyways, I really hope that you enjoyed this interesting dissection of this band's material. No Forever Now, number one. The hell is wrong with us? But yeah, that being said, I really hope you enjoyed. If you want to look into the description, there'll be a schedule, also be a link to the Discord server on which you can maybe see some stuff about the show. Possibly. But yeah, really hope you enjoyed and you have a great one.